The leather-bound notebook fell open as Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers lifted it from the dusty box in her late father's study, and the first words she read made her blood run cold. "I forgive Victoria Chen. She doesn't know that cruelty is just fear wearing a prettier mask." The handwriting was unmistakable, shaky but determined, the letters formed by someone who had taught himself to write beautifully despite having hands roughened by years of manual labor. It belonged to Daniel Martinez, the boy she had spent 4 years tormenting at Westbridge Academy, the boy whose scholarship status she had wielded like a weapon, the boy whose quiet dignity she had mistaken for weakness. And now, 12 years after graduation, holding his private thoughts in her hands, Victoria felt the foundation of everything she believed about herself begin to crumble. If you believe in the power of kindness and second chances, if you've ever wondered whether our actions truly come back to shape who we become, please hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to this channel. This story will remind you that every person we meet is fighting a battle we know nothing about. Victoria had been the undisputed queen of Westbridge Academy, the elite private school where tuition costs more than most families earned in a year. Her father's name adorned the library wing. Her mother chaired the fundraising committee. She wore designer clothes that Daniel probably couldn't afford even if he worked for a year, and she made sure he knew it every single day. When Daniel arrived sophomore year on a full academic scholarship, wearing the same 3 rotating outfits and carrying his lunch in reused plastic bags, Victoria saw an opportunity to solidify her social standing by having someone to look down upon. She never physically hurt him, but her words cut deeper than any blade. She mocked his worn sneakers in front of crowds. She loudly wondered if he showered, because he always smelled like the restaurant where he worked nights. She organized study groups and deliberately excluded him, then laughed when he asked to join. She convinced others that his academic success was somehow undeserved, that the scholarship should have gone to someone more suitable, someone who belonged in their world. Daniel never fought back. He simply absorbed her cruelty with those dark, tired eyes that seemed to hold oceans of sadness and something else she couldn't name then, but recognized now as grace. He continued arriving early to school, stayed late in the library, worked his evening shifts, and somehow maintained perfect grades while she coasted on her privilege. She remembered the day she knocked his lunch tray out of his hands in the cafeteria, watching his carefully prepared meal splatter across the expensive tile floor. He had looked at her for a long moment, not with anger but with something far worse, pity, then quietly cleaned up the mess while she and her friends walked away laughing. That look haunted her sometimes in the years that followed, appearing in unguarded moments like a ghost she couldn't exorcise. After graduation, Victoria had done what was expected of privileged girls like her. She traveled through Europe, attended an Ivy League university her father's donations had guaranteed her entry to, and eventually returned home to work at the family's investment firm. She married Preston Ashworth III, had 2 beautiful children, and lived in a mansion that appeared in architecture magazines. Her life was a perfectly curated Instagram feed, an endless stream of charity galas and yacht club brunches, but something had always felt hollow, like she was watching her life from outside her body, playing a role scripted by others. When her father died suddenly 6 months ago, that hollowness expanded into a chasm that threatened to swallow her whole. Settling his estate had brought her to his private study, a room she had rarely entered. Even as a child, among the files and folders, she found a box marked Westbridge Academy Scholarship Program. Inside were applications, essays, and recommendation letters from students who had received her family's financial support over the decades. And there, near the bottom, was Daniel's complete file, including the notebook that had somehow ended up in her father's possession, probably left behind during some scholarship meeting Daniel had attended. As Victoria read through the notebook, tears began streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. The entries chronicled Daniel's daily life with raw honesty. He wrote about his mother's cancer treatments and how he worked 16-hour days to help with medical bills. He described studying by streetlight when the electricity was shut off at home. He wrote about the hunger that gnawed at his stomach and how he told himself it was just making him stronger. But most devastating were the entries about her, about Victoria. He wrote about her cruelty, yes, but without hatred. Instead, he analyzed her behavior like a puzzle he was trying to solve, ultimately concluding that her need to diminish him came from her own insecurity and fear of being ordinary. He wrote that he forgave her because carrying anger was a luxury he couldn't afford when he was busy trying to build a future. He wrote that he hoped someday she would discover who she really was beneath the designer labels and practice superiority. He wrote that he prayed for her happiness even as she made his life miserable. The notebook also contained his dreams, beautifully articulated plans to become a doctor and open a free clinic in underserved communities. There were sketches of the building he imagined, lists of medical equipment he would need and calculations of how many people he could help. His ambition wasn't about wealth or status. It was about service, about transforming his suffering into something that could alleviate the suffering of others. The purity of his purpose, preserved in this notebook, written by a teenage boy who had every reason to become bitter and cruel, shattered something in Victoria's chest. She immediately searched for Daniel online. What she found made her sob openly in that quiet study. Daniel had achieved his dream. Dr. Daniel Martinez now ran 3 free clinics in low-income neighborhoods, had been featured in medical journals for his innovative approaches to community health care, and had recently been nominated for a humanitarian award. His photo showed a man in his early 30s with kind eyes and a gentle smile, wearing simple scrubs instead of the designer suits of doctors she knew. He had become exactly who he said he would be, despite every obstacle including her cruelty. He had transformed pain into purpose while she had transformed privilege into emptiness. If this story is touching your heart, if you're feeling something deep and real right now, please don't just watch and leave. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments, have you ever regretted how you treated someone? Your engagement helps stories like this reach people who need them most. And please, comment below, what would you say to someone from your past if you could? Victoria knew what she had to do. She contacted Daniel's clinic and requested a meeting, not revealing who she was. When she arrived at the modest building in a neighborhood her current social circle would never visit, she found him treating a homeless man with the same careful attention a Park Avenue doctor might give a billionaire. When Daniel finally looked up and recognized her, she saw surprise flicker across his face, then understanding, then that same grace she had never deserved. Before he could speak, she held out his notebook and said the words she should have said 12 years ago, "I'm sorry, and I want to learn how to be better." Daniel smiled, the kind of smile that forgave. Without forgetting, and replied, "I wrote in that notebook that I hoped you would find yourself someday. I'm glad that day is today. Welcome." In that moment, surrounded by the evidence of his goodness and her own wasted years, Victoria finally understood that true wealth had nothing to do with money and everything to do with how we treat people when no one is watching, when there is nothing to gain, when kindness costs us something, but we give it anyway. Daniel had always been rich in the ways that mattered, and she was only now beginning to learn what that meant.